We begin on Parliament Hill, where the House of Commons has voted to pass the updated Canada-Ukraine free trade deal.
I declare the motion adopted.
Conservatives voted against that bill. Now the Liberals are accusing them of abandoning Ukraine. This comes as Canadian interest in Ukraine is waning and public support is weakening, according to a new poll. The number of people saying Canada has offered too much support to Ukraine has doubled since the early weeks of the war against Russia. Meanwhile, an old scandal resurfaces. Media reports reveal that the Prime Minister invited Yaroslav Hunka, the veteran of a Nazi unit, to attend a Toronto rally honoring the Ukrainian president. Former Speaker Anthony Rota resigned over Hunka's appearance in the House of Commons, and opposition leader Pierre Poilievre says Trudeau should too.
Now we know that he personally invited that same individual. He actually said the opposite. And he said that the former speaker had to resign over doing the exact same thing. So will he hold himself to the very same standard and admit that he's not fit for office?
He is choosing to not stand with Ukraine, not stand with Ukrainians, and not stand with Ukrainian Canadians. Why are they abandoning Ukraine?
I'm joined now by two MPs from the foyer of the House of Commons, Ontario Liberal MP Francesco Sorbara and the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic Heather McPherson. We requested that a Conservative MP join the discussion, but no one was provided. But I want to thank you both for joining me today.
Of course.
It's nice to be here.
Mr. Sorbara, I'd like to start with you, if I could, on the revelations in the last little while about the invitation of Mr. Hunka to the reception with the President of Ukraine in Toronto. The Prime Minister's office didn't tell us at the time. They're not telling us why they kept this secret despite knowing it. Do you have an explanation as to why they didn't reveal this when this was the controversy in the moment?
Thank you, David, for the question. I'd like to start off by saying the evening of the reception that we're referencing, we're talking about where President Zelensky and the Prime Minister and many, many dignitaries, and more importantly, where literally thousands of Ukrainian Canadians attended. I was there that evening, and it was one of the most powerful, emotional events that I've gone to as a member of Parliament. You had Ukrainian Canadians singing their national anthem, the Ukrainian national anthem, and just the solidarity, the togetherness that we witnessed that night was something I will never forget. With regards to the invitation that was sent to this individual, whether the invitation was here or Parliament or that evening, and this individual was listed as an invitee by an association or group, look, it was unacceptable. It was wrong. It should never have happened. We know that. We've stated that. And really the focus for myself and for my colleagues is, today's events where we voted and we voted for and it passed a modernized Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement. That's my focus, and my focus is standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian Canadians, with Ukrainians fighting against an unjustified invasion, and answering President Zelensky's call to make sure we get this the agreement done, and now to the Senate so we can get royal assent so we can ensure Canadians and our government stands with the Ukrainian people, whether it's here in Canada or in Ukraine.
Okay, I want to get to the free trade agreement in just a second, but the Prime Minister's office must have known this when Mr. Hunka's presence in the gallery was a controversy. It's made very clear it was the Speaker who was responsible for this, but this was an invitation from the Prime Minister's office. I know it was recommended by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Yes. But why are we finding out about this from Rebel News and then the Globe and Mail and not from the Prime Minister's office itself?
Okay. With reference, I know the former Speaker of the House has taken responsibility for the invitation that was sent to this individual. And with regards to, any sort of aftermath in terms of other organizations inviting this individual, again, thousands of invitations went out to individuals. This person was not at the event that evening. The event that evening was, again, I would say one of the most powerful events that I've attended. And again, the focus for myself and my colleagues is continuing to stand by the Ukrainian people, whether here in Canada, the 1.5 million Ukrainian Canadians that call Canada home, and the Ukrainians that are fighting the unjustified, tyrannical Russian government that, nearly 2 years ago, I believe now, invaded Ukraine.
All right, Heather McPherson, I heard the Conservatives today say this means the Prime Minister should follow Anthony Rota's lead and resign his position for being dishonest with Parliament on this. I'm not sure the NDP share that position or not, but what is your view on the fact that this wasn't disclosed in the moment and we're only finding out about it now?
I mean, it's very disappointing. Realistically, we have a number of Jewish Canadians who are very hurt. This caused deep damage to our country's reputation on the world stage in front of our greatest allies, and it is something we need to get to the bottom of. This can't happen again. We can't be in a situation where things like this happen. And so the fact that there's no transparency, the fact that the Prime Minister's office didn't come clean on this, I think is really problematic. So I want to make sure that the Liberals are taking this seriously. It is not an opportunity to pivot to other things. This is very serious. This hurt members of our community. This hurt our reputation internationally, and that's serious. Now, the other thing that I have to say is this is detracting from our support for Ukraine. This is distracting us from what we should also be focusing on, and that is making sure that Canada is standing staunchly with Ukraine to help them fight against the Russian Federation. And this now has muddied that water, and I think that's really, really unfortunate.
So on that point, I watched the vote today in the House of Commons, the Conservatives voting against the updated free trade agreement with Ukraine, saying it's because it has a reference to carbon pricing in it, even though Ukraine has had a carbon tax for more than a decade. What message does it send that this wasn't a unanimous vote in the House of Commons, and what do you make of the carbon tax excuse or reasoning that the Conservatives are providing?
I mean, it's absurd. We know Zelensky asked for us to support this fair trade agreement. The Conservatives are clearly showing that they don't understand geopolitical implications of this. They're clearly showing that they are unfit to lead. Pierre Poilievre is unfit to be a prime minister on the world stage. Our Ukrainian allies have asked us to do this, to support them, to have this agreement in place. Canadians of Ukrainian descent have asked us to support the ambassador, and yet the Conservatives think that they can play right-wing politics on this and somehow score points with some of the far right within their party. It's disappointing.
Mr. Sorbara, I'm sure you've seen the numbers out from Angus Reid today that show a decline in support across the country in terms of support for Ukraine, and with a big surge in that amongst Conservative voters. 19% in May of 2022 felt Canada was doing too much to support Ukraine. Now that's 43% amongst people who voted Conservative in the past. How does that play into what we saw in the House of Commons today?
You know what, David, today was incredibly disappointing. We've had cross-party consensus in standing shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people. I'm not surprised the Conservatives voted against Operation Unifier, where we have Canadian soldiers assisting in the training of Ukrainian troops. We actually have Canadian soldiers in England, the UK, and in Poland right now assisting on that front. They voted against the $500 million in terms of additional military support to Ukraine. I'm not surprised, but I'm incredibly disappointed that they're playing to the very far right in any jurisdiction in playing. That's wrong. We got to stand with our principles. We got to stand with our NATO allies. We just saw the European Union this week put together a €54 billion aid package to Ukraine. We need to stand with Ukraine, with our NATO allies, with our friends fighting for freedom and democracy for the Ukrainian people. In the Canadian Congress, all the associations across Canada, the 1.5 million Canadians of Ukrainian heritage that have been here well over 100 years that helped build this country, we will stand with them as a party, as a government. We will continue to do so. And it is incredibly, incredibly disappointing that the Conservatives have lost their principles on this to placate a portion of their right-wing base. Incredibly disappointing, David.
Yeah, but Heather McPherson, it's we're not just seeing this in the House of Commons or on the far right. I mean, this is a shift in certain segments of the population in Canada. We're seeing this in the United States, where there's an inability to get an aid package through the Congress right now. How concerned are you? I know Mr. Sorbara pointed out Europe has stepped up, but they're right there on the doorstep of the conflict. That people on this side of the Atlantic are losing interest in this war and losing, and that support for Ukraine is dwindling.
Well, I mean, it certainly doesn't help when you have Conservative members of Parliament who a year ago were standing in the House of Commons and saying that they had full support, and now are showing that they in fact do not. that doesn't help with the public opinion. You know, when I speak to my constituents, and I will admit, in Edmonton, in Alberta, we have an enormous Ukrainian diaspora that is incredibly supportive of what's happening in Ukraine. But you know, having folks like Tucker Carlson, who's currently in Russia meeting with Putin, come and meet with the premier in Alberta, that hardly helps. That hardly helps for us to maintain that solidarity that we need. You know, we need to have all parties moving together to support Ukraine. This is international law. This is the world order. This is democracy. These are the things that we're fighting for. And the Conservatives feel, I guess, like they can just change the channel whenever they like. That's not foreign policy. That's not foreign leadership. That's not leadership on the global stage. And it's incredibly, incredibly divisive and dangerous.
Mr. Sorbara, one thing the Conservatives have asked for in recent days is the transfer of decommissioned rockets in the Canadian inventory to Ukraine, something a Ukrainian general has also asked for. Yes. I know you're not the Minister of Defense and you can't make this decision, but broadly, do you think this is something Canada will consider, should consider, and maybe should do?
David, we will first of all do everything we can to aid the Ukrainian military in its fight against Russia. With regards to these 80,000 plus older type rockets, obviously we are investigating and going down that path. We need to make sure they are operationally effective. We need to make sure they are safe, and we can have the ability to transport them to the Ukraine. I know Minister Blair and his team are on this. It's not like we've been on this just for a day or two. We've actually been on this for several weeks and months, and we are working with the Ukrainian military on this front, much like we have done since day one when Russia invaded Ukraine justifiably, and Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom and their democracy and human rights and their territorial sovereignty, and we will continue to be with Ukraine as we move along and go forward and defeat Russia and then help Ukrainians rebuild their country.
Heather McPherson, just as a final point on that, where are the NDP on this in terms of looking at decommissioned weapons, rockets, and sending them to Ukraine if possible?
You know, I think there's so many ways we can help. I think that we should be doing everything we can. The New Democratic Party has been very clear on that. We should be providing the support that we can. And there's some things that need to get fixed in our system. You know, we have not done well at seizing Russian assets and repurposing them for Ukraine. We have not done well in our sanctions. You know, even today, the minister put more people on the sanctions list. We have no enforcement mechanism, so it's a little bit of political theater. You know, humanitarian aid. We need to make sure that those detonators that were going through other countries to Russia, that's not happening. It doesn't make a lot of sense for Canada to be paying to have demining efforts go on in Ukraine at the same time that we're sending detonators that are being used in those exact same mines. So there's a lot of things that Canada still needs to do to stand up for Ukraine. I'm happy to work with the government on those things. I'm happy to work with all parties. I hope the Conservatives finally see the light and come back to support for Ukraine. But at this point, you know, I think it's really important that all Canadians move forward on this. Okay,
I understand, you know, there's other points, but just on the rockets, is that something the NDP would support?
You know, I think we need to look at all of it. I think Mr. Sorbara has made it very clear. There are some challenges on figuring out whether that gets there. I don't know the details of any of that, so I would need to have more information before I could make that decision.
And David, if I can just reemphasize again, the Conservatives just a few weeks ago on what we call the supplementary estimates voted against Operation Unifier to help Ukrainian soldiers. They voted against the $500 million of additional military aid, and here they are today trying to sort of change the channel from voting against a modernized Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement that we know will benefit Canadians and Ukrainians as we move forward and we continue to act in unity, and that's where we should be. And it's just so disappointing to see the official opposition party abandon Ukrainian Canadians and abandon the people of Ukraine.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. We're out of time, but I want to thank you both for joining me. Liberal MP Francesco Sorbara and NDP Foreign Affairs critic Heather McPherson. And if you joined us midway through this, we did request a Conservative MP to join this conversation, but no one was made available.